I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and it's time for one of my favorite times of year. The time of year where we can get Easter egg dyeing kits and use that to dye some yarn. The reason why these kits are so fun is that they come with these little solid tablets of food coloring. And we can use these to dye yarn in a fun way. It's sort of like a slow release tablet, allowing you to create some really cool space-dyed effects and to take advantage of the fact that this food coloring is dry and a dissolvable tablet versus starting out as a liquid. Yes, you can use artificial food coloring to dye yarn, as long as you pick the correct kind of yarn. You need to have a protein-based yarn like wool. This won't work on cotton or synthetics like acrylic. And the only other things that we'll need will be some water, some heat, and some acid. You need acidic conditions in order for food coloring to bind to yarn. And some of the Easter egg tablets do have citric acid in them, but they also have sodium bicarbonate, which will raise the pH too high. So I typically will add a lot of white vinegar to my dye bath when I'm using these dye tablets. When shopping for Easter egg dyeing kits for dyeing yarn, pay attention to how many tablets the box says it has. All of the other extras and glitter and things don't matter because a lot of the kits may have different packaging and extras, but all have the same or very similar dye tablets. So when I'm looking at the pricing, I look at the price per tablet. It's just a little tip. I also recommend waiting until the day after Easter because the kits will often go 75 to 90% off on clearance, and so that's a great time to grab some at a fairly affordable way. But if the kits you're looking at come with liquid food coloring pouches, at that point it would be better to just buy some liquid food coloring versus going for the Easter egg kit. I already said that we needed a protein-based yarn. And today we're going to use Knit Crate's Vidalana Ascendance yarn in the color Limestone, which is a white yarn. But you can use any kind of pastel yarn. It can be superwash. This one is just 100% Peruvian Highland wool, but this kind of technique will work on a variety of wool bases. I have done a number of different projects with Easter egg dye tablets, and I have a whole playlist where you can go for inspiration of different kinds of yarn effects you can get. But today I wanted to revisit something I haven't done in a while. And we are going to turn this skein of yarn into a cake using this ball winder here. And then we're going to insert the dye tablets into the dry cake and then submerge the yarn to create a fun asymmetric colorway. But now let me go finish winding this up. I recommend using dry hands for inserting tablets into our yarn cake. But if you want to check what the colors of the different tablets are, you can use a damp paper towel and sort of draw on it like crayons. The colors have changed over the years. I actually investigated all of the colors in a series of different tablets. I think I used one twice. I had to do some double checking there. But over the years, the colors of tablets have changed a little bit. And so yours may be slightly different if you have a 2022 Past Deluxe kit. But now we're going to get ready to insert these into our yarn cake. One note on this yarn, it has a really cool chain-ply construction, and I'm really excited to see how it'll turn out. This cake is fairly tightly wound, which will keep the colors a little bit where we place them, a little bit. But let's go ahead and stick like a purple right in the center, so about halfway through the cake. And then every so often I'm going to go some layers out, and I am going to try to put the color sort of like towards the middle of the center and sort of going spatially around to some different regions. And, you know, we may have some things that are somewhat close together and we may not, but, you know, we'll see where things end up. So there's a light green there. I'm not going in any specific kind of order. Let's do a blue more towards the outside. When it comes to the molecules that are in food coloring, and I'll flip and I'll just put these in this way. when it comes to the molecules that are in food coloring, reds will strike the fastest, and then blues and yellow will take more time to bind to the yarn. And so I have no real idea where these are going, but it's going to give us something that's a bit of a mystery. And let's go like there. So now we have all of these colors inside of here, and we are going to go submerge this in some water and we'll see what happens. Right here I have an 8-quart stainless steel dedicated dye pot. I am personally comfortable dyeing yarn with food coloring using cooking pots and pans, but since I'm using other commercial dyes today, I want to use my dedicated dye equipment. And I'm going to start by adding a whole cup of just distilled white vinegar. And then this way we can add water as needed, and we should have enough vinegar to help things set. But depending on how quickly the colors are striking, we may end up wanting to add more. Our yarn cake is only a couple of inches high, so I'm going to add enough water so we have just like an inch or two of water in the pot, and we can add more water as needed. And let's see. Actually, I'll go ahead and add the entire 8 cups of water I have. We could add more water as needed throughout the process. So we have a total of 9 cups of liquid in here, 8 cups of water with 1 cup of white vinegar. But the main goal is to have a couple of inches of water at the bottom of the pot. And now we're going to heat things up. Okay, we are nice and steamy and hot. It doesn't have to be at a full boil. And I know there's not going to be enough water to cover the whole cake right now, but that's part of the fun, and it's okay to reduce the temperature. So now let's take our cake, put it in. Ooh, it's sinking in really nicely. It's sort of just sunk into the bottom. And you can use a slotted spoon to help it submerge if you want. You can even like press, ooh, see that got some color to move, press to get the whole thing wet, and then start to watch as the colors move. Now I am going to add a little bit more water to bring the volume of water. That's just a couple more cups, just so that way the top is at the surface. And now we pretty much wait, but so you can tap, or you can choose not to move it at all. But I see some green coming up at the edge, and the colors near the outside are gonna start to leak out into the container, and then those will go around more the surface. And so that's one reason why I have the top not completely submerged at this point. But oop, you see that green coming out. The average of a lot of these colors tends to be fairly green, but you know, we'll see what we end up with. It's like tie-dye. We're not gonna know what the yarn looks like until we unwind it in the end. But now we wait. I am going to reduce the heat a bit more to low, and whoa, see all the green that has come out, but we don't know what's happening inside. We know we have a ton of green on the outside, and I'm not seeing much about what's happening on top yet. Ooh, I am curious, but this sort of olive green is something we've seen when we've done these cake dyeings before. But clearly we know we've got some like blue and some other colors, and something has spread more there. And we'll have the white from the surface and maybe something else from the bottom, because I'm not stirring things up yet. I think what I want to do is leave this as is for another 15 minutes with the heat on low. And then after that, maybe we'll add either more acid or more water. That's something that's fun with these. You can play it by ear based on what you see. If you want, you can absolutely cover it all the way, but I'm trying to add some fun variation into things, and so that's why I'm not gonna cover the whole thing yet. We will do that eventually. The only thing I do not want to do now is to press on the cake. Because if I press on it, I would squeeze out the color that's in there and soak in this green, which may happen naturally, and that is perfectly fine and something that I would enjoy, but that's not what I'm going for at the moment. there are a few reasons here why it's taking longer for the colors to strike. As I come in with another cup of white vinegar, which I'm pouring over the yarn cake and around. One of the reasons why it's taking longer is a surface area issue. If we had this as a skein of yarn in the pot completely unwound, the dye would be able to access a lot of the fiber, whereas here it's only able to access a portion that is around the cake. The other reason that things may be slower is that these dye tablets do tend to take longer, and the yarn we have here is non-superwash. If it was a superwash yarn, things would strike a little faster. But I'm now bringing in more water, which is now letting our cake float for the first time. And I am now going to, I'm not pressing it, but I'm going to like tap it and move the yarn over the surface a little bit. There's a difference in color to what's on the top versus what is all around, but we now just have more water, and I probably added about 3 cups of water total to get it to float in this pot. But now I'm gonna let things heat for another 30 minutes and we'll check back in. And more and more and more color comes out. Ah yes, it's been a while since I've done one of these. If the yarn was superwash, the colors maybe would strike a little bit faster. Part of this is just the cake dyeing process, and part, yeah, it's mostly the cake dyeing process. I do have videos with these exact Easter egg dye tablets where I can get the colors to all strike completely onto non-superwash yarn in, say, a catering steam pan. So it is possible, but I am going to continue to leave this on low heat. Let's do another 45 minutes. And if at that point I'm not seeing a change, whether darker or lighter, in the water of the pot, we can add a skein of yarn to help soak up some of that color. It has been 45 minutes and we haven't had a lot of change. And so what I want to do now is take another skein of the same yarn, but this time, oh, I guess it's also just dry. And we're going to slowly soak this in to the kettle. And the nice thing is that the color is not that deep. We will potentially see some transfer of color from the cake onto here as well, and depending on how this literal mop that we're going to use to soak up the extra color in here, depending on how it turns out, we may decide that we want to over dye it or add some other color at some point. But I'm just slowly, I thought I was going to use a spoon, but I'm literally just letting the water soak up on it. And I do see that I think that the reds that were in there, we have soaked up into this yarn already, because you can see the color is looking a little bit brighter in the green family. I will want to add more water, which actually I'm going to go grab that. Okay, I have about like 6 cups of water. We have plenty of acid in here, but actually even as I pour that on, a lot of those greens just have not struck yet. But I do see some like brownish tones as well, and I have a feeling that with this in here we should start to see some of these greens really strike finally to our yarn. For a mop, I could have picked something superwash, but there's a chance that this more tonal kettle dyed yarn is going to pair really in a fun way with our blank. And now, because everything's more crowded, I am going to just sort of poke this in. Yeah, so it's possible that this could pair really, really well with it, and so that's why I wanted to use the same kind of yarn base. And I do see, yes, some colors shifting a little bit in there. And so with, actually you can see the shifts between the deeper green and the lighter green here. But with what we have here now, there is less resist because it's not a tightly wound cake. It is sort of pushed in, but it's pushed in and the colors can access more of it. So I'm increasing the heat a little bit because we added more water, but I'm gonna heat this for 30 minutes and then we'll come see if I need to add more acid or what we need to see. Let's check in and see how things are going in here. And haha, there's a hint of color, and you can see some of those more reddish tones from our yarn cake have bound a bit to this mop that we have here. And so I'm going to put like a different section of it next to the cake, so if we get more transfer. But I'm now going to turn off the heat and leave things to cool completely. This time we'll let the rest of the color set, and then once things are cool, we'll give the yarn a rinse before letting the cake dry out a bit, so that we can unravel it without stretching out the yarn too much. Okay, let's remove first our yarn mop that we use to help soak up that excess color. And I guarantee we're going to see more colors from our yarn cake. But ooh! Look, we've got a nice spot of red. We see some blues on the bottom. And if we open it up, there's some yellow, there's some white. There are colors. It's just this green is sort of the average. There is not a lot. I washed this yarn properly. There's not a lot of washing I can do to the yarn cake at this time. I'm going to want to give it a thorough wash once it dries a bit so we can unravel it. So I can put it through the spin dryer with the other skein as a counterweight to help remove some of the water, which I do want to do, but ooh, I see some purple. But we'll give it a much more thorough wash once all of the yarn is, well, once it's not all the way dry, but mostly dry. But this other skein I can wash with a little bit of soap. I'm not seeing any bleeding though, which is always great news. The reason why you don't want to wind the yarn while it's completely wet is, one, you'll fling water all over your home, but two, you don't want to felt or block the yarn. You don't want to accidentally stretch it too much and lose some of its beautiful bounce. So I'm adding just a little bit of some clear dish soap just to see we have no color bleeding. So I'm going to just rinse out this soap and then put this through the spin dryer with the cake. Let the cake dry for a couple days, and then we will work to unwind the cake to see what our gradient looks like. Or not really a gradient as much as an asymmetric colorway. It's been a few days and I'm ready to unravel this yarn cake onto a niddy noddy so we can see the color progressions. If I peek beneath the surface, I see we still have some white. Oh, I see, oh, look at that patch of blue. That's where we had a blue tablet. And I guess the other blue tablet. And what else maybe will we find? Maybe there was a red one right there. So those pops of color are going to be located on only a certain section of the yarn, giving us something fun and unique. I'm going to go wind this in onto my niddy noddy off camera, and then we'll get to see the gradient. Here is the yarn cake unraveled onto my niddy noddy, which actually the niddy noddy I use I made out of PVC pipe. It's really easy and cheap to create. I have a whole video on that. You can see that green that we got on the outside, but as we go towards the interior, we have different pops of color with more blue, then some red and yellow, to this really cool sort of like teal green. And then towards the center, there's even some purple. I think looking at it here shows how asymmetric it is, but it doesn't really highlight how some of these other pops of color really do fade in and out through the course of the skein. Off the niddy noddy, you can kind of appreciate more that some of these reds and yellows come in further towards the outside, and we have a lot more white and less of the green as we go towards the center where there was more yarn that wasn't exposed to the surface. Now, as I was winding this onto the niddy noddy, I did have one break in the yarn, and that break seemed to come from one of the points of a lot of color. And I noticed that there seemed to be a little bit of a texture difference around some of those points. And I have two hypotheses for what could be going on. One, the sodium bicarbonate dissolving in that localized position damaged the yarn a little bit where the dye tablets were placed. Or two, there is still some residue in there, especially towards the center, that made the yarn a little bit more stiff and just needs to be rinsed out. Once I finish filming these conclusions, I am going to go wash the yarn off camera. And if I observe anything differently, I'll pop back in to share my thoughts there. Quick washing update. I have been soaking the yarn in some water with soap and then just plain water for probably about just 20 minutes or so as I did other things. And the texture that I had felt around some of the pigmented colors, especially the ones towards the center, that texture feeling is gone, the like stiffness in there. And so that is good. I have a feeling just there was some stiffness because there was some undissolved tablet in one of those, and that's what caused the break. Versus there actually being a degradation in the strands themselves. But anyway, I'm gonna pop this through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry. This Chain-Ply yarn from Knit Crate is beautiful, but it is a little bit more delicate because there aren't really multiple plies holding it together. A snap in one of the thin plies would break the strand because it is a crochet chain versus having multiple plies twisted together where a little disruption to one ply wouldn't snap the entire strand. So it may be worth, if you want to do yarn cake dyeing, to use a non-superwash yarn that is a little bit more robust, a little bit more of a workhorse yarn, than one that's a bit more delicate and airy like this base from Knit Crate. Speaking of light and airy, we have this second skein of yarn that we added to the pot to help soak up some of those green tones. And this actually gives me a little bit of an idea. What would happen if, as I was cake dyeing yarn with these Easter egg tablets on the inside, if I had some superwash mini skeins around the outside in the water? So as dye started coming out of the yarn cake, there was something present that would soak up some of that color a little bit faster. It wouldn't get all of it, but that is something that intrigues me and is something that I would really like to try. But anyway, we have a beautiful mint and mossy, almost lichen green, a little bit hints of red yarn here. And you know, the yarn is a bit fluffier than it was in the yarn cake. This may fluff up once I wash and let it dry. It is a little bit stuck to itself, but not horribly felted. You can see the definition of the chain ply really well, and I know that this would wind with a ball winder off of a Swift super easily. And I think these two bases could pair together in a really fun way. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you would like to learn more about any of the materials that I used in today's video, go and check out the links that I have in the video description. And if you're interested in signing up for Knit Crate, you can save 20% off your first month with the code ChemKnits20. I'll have information about that all down in the video description. With Easter approaching, now is the time to go get Easter egg dyeing kits on clearance. And as I said, the thing to pay attention to is how many tablets there are per the cost of the kit that you're purchasing. A lot of times the kits will charge more for the various stickers or glitter and things that they may have in them, but that's not going to help you when it comes to dyeing yarn. So yeah, look for the number of dye tablets. And honestly, if they have liquid food coloring in them, then it's more cost effective to just go buy food coloring from the supermarket than to buy it in an Easter egg dyeing kit. Of course, if you're dyeing eggs and you have leftovers from the kits, by all means use that to dye up some yarn. After all, there are lots of beautiful colors that you can get on yarn when you're dyeing with food coloring. And food coloring is a really great way to see if you enjoy the whole process of dyeing yarn before going and purchasing dedicated dye equipment and commercial dyes and things like that. Thank you so much for watching.